So the key thing for the practice is to have a sense of relaxation, of releasing fixation, fixation on habitual patterns of arousal and so on. So we have our body, our energy manifesting through the breath and speech, and we have our mental experience. And these three operate together. So if the body can be still and the breath is flowing in an even way, and we can relax our dependency on thoughts, our tendency to take refuge in thoughts as if they were going to tell us the real truth or meaning of our lives. Thoughts are useful in terms of practical problem solving. You can think about where you've left your passport. You can think about how much money you need to have ready to pay the council tax bill that will come in soon. That organizing and planning of your relationship with the world is mediated through concepts. So on that level, they're very useful. However, thoughts can take on a life of their own. And then we're thinking for the sake of maintaining the apparatus of thinking. So the function of the meditation is to let go. And this is helped if you have some physical practice to do. In the Dzogchen lineages, there are particular kinds of yoga that you can learn. But in my experience of people practicing in Europe, I think the best thing is to adopt a form which is supported by some local group. So if there's a good local yoga group, that's fine. Or a Tai Chi group or a Kumye group. As long as you can get some support in doing the practice, it doesn't particularly matter what the form is, because they all go in the same direction. They're dealing with tension and release. Tension and release. And as you tense up, you're aware that you're tensing, and then you're aware that you're releasing. And what you become aware within any of these physical practices is how you have habitual forms of tensing that you're hardly aware of, and therefore you can't fully release. So if you're doing traditional yoga, you can begin and end with the corpse posture, the shavasana, where you're just lying, not doing anything, breathing in and out, but like a corpse. And for many people, that's the most difficult thing to do, because you can do the other asanas. You can bend, or you can hold the tension, or you can intend something, but in shavasana there's nothing to do. And so in that way it's very harmonious with the direction of Dzogchen. We don't need to practice doing to have intention and mobilization, but we want to see what is the ground or the basis out of which the intention arises. So in our understanding, that is the space of the mind, or the Dharma Dhatu, or emptiness. And so we only find the emptiness if we're not preoccupied. So anything that can help you not be preoccupied is very useful. So simple mindfulness, if you're washing the dishes, or cleaning the bath, or doing some work in the garden, again and again, bring your attention fully back to what you're doing, and then it's much more relaxing. Because if you're distracted, if you're thinking about something else, then your mind and body are splitting off. The body's carrying out actions in a quasi-autonomous way, while your mind is moving around thinking about other things. So if you bring your attention back, and you're mindfully present with the simplicity of the task, that helps you to see the integration of body and energy and mental activity. So yesterday we looked a little bit at the nature of consciousnesses, and we actually only did 6 consciousnesses. We did the 5 sense consciousnesses and mental consciousness. And there are 2 other consciousnesses, and they're important for thinking about death, particularly in its active form of killing. because killing means to make something dead, whether it's killing mosquitoes, or killing animals in an abattoir, or killing soldiers in war, or killing people in a car accident. So we have the five senses feeding in, and the mental consciousness which organizes them. And that mental consciousness can be quite rational and clear, but the seventh consciousness is the consciousness which is the sight of the imbuing of the moment with a flavor of the five poisons. So the five poisons are the movement of affective arousal which comes into our experience of what is arising. So the first of these is kind of mental dullness, or an opaque quality, sometimes even translated as stupidity. It doesn't mean stupidity in the sense of not knowing what day it is. It's not stupid in the way of not remembering the capital of France or Italy. It's not a loss of information, because you can be very, very intelligent and still be inside this kind of stupidity. It's a dullness which doesn't let you see the basis out of which things are arising. So, for example, I could say, well, I'm sitting here with you and I'm talking. The one who is talking is me. So I am the doer of the talking. I am the talker. The agency is embedded in me. And we're used to that kind of description. That makes sense to everyone. Because when you're a child, you're told that you shouldn't fidget and you should focus your attention, and you learn to manage and control the organization of your bodily behavior and how you speak, and not to make too much noise if your parents are trying to talk together, whatever. So we learn a kind of adjustment, all of which is confirming I am the one who is doing these things. But if I'm talking, where does the talking come from? Is there some little James, some homunculus living inside me that whacks the words out of my mouth? Who's doing the talking? I am aware that I'm talking, but I don't know what I'm going to say. So I'm finding the talking moving through what I would call me. Or the talking is an expression of me. But then, of course, when we look for who is the one who calls themselves me, what is the mind? And we think, does the mind have a shape? Does it have a color? Does it come from somewhere? Does it stay? Does it go? When we investigate again and again, we see that there is no definable essence or substance. And so when I'm talking, the words are emerging out of, as it were, the sky within. Although there's no real division between inner and outer, it's as if from the inner space or the inner emptiness, the sound arises and moves into the outer space. We walk, moving with our inner spaciousness into the outer space. So movement is movement in space all the time. And when we say, I am doing this, I am eating, I am cleaning my teeth, this is a commentary, an interpretive narrative, which seems to be illuminating because it links us into culture and the normal way in which we as human beings make sense of what is going on, but it's actually an obscuration of the fact that this is arising by itself. So this is what stupidity means, is to claim agency and ownership for something about which you're actually only the observer. So in the Dzogchen tradition, we have two main aspects. Primordial purity, which in Tibetan is kada. Ka means from the very beginning, or like a pillar, something which is supporting everything, and dat means pure, so pure from the very beginning means not created, not contaminated, not part of some compoundedness or interweaving. The mind is just open and empty. But this is inseparable from Hlundrup, or instant presence, or effortless manifestation. Hlun in Tibetan means a hill or a heap, and drup means to be made. So it's made all at once. It just is. There's a kind of instant presencing. Here we are, and everything's just here. And in that just here-ness is the field of our experience. So we're sitting here in the room, we see other people's bodies, we can see a bit of our bodies, we might see our knees or our hands, we have sensation arising, and we don't feel the sensation in other people's bodies, we just feel the sensation in ours. But what is the status of the sensation? It's something I experience. What is the status of seeing my hands? Well, that's an experience. Or seeing your faces, or seeing the color of your cardigan, or how your hair is today. Each of these are manifesting experiences. So you have a field of experience which is arising moment by moment in its particular configuration, and within that we're moving in various ways. In the moment, most of us are being quite still. There's some movement with the bodies turning and so on. When we have a break, we'll get up, we'll go and make some coffee or tea or go outside, and then different movements arise. Each of these movements is a movement of the patterning of our energy in space. So if you see space and you see that space is shining as the presence of our experience, then you have clarity. But when you don't, when you lose touch with the space, then you're left with just a lot of stuff. And the stuff then gets interpreted, because you've got to sort it out somehow. So life is happening. So it's a bit like volunteering in an Oxfam shop. You get all these big bags of old clothes, and you open the bag and you take them out and you think, oh, this is rubbish, recycle that one. Oh, we could get £5 for this. And that's what we're doing moment by moment. We have a selective attention. We're sorting out the stuff that's arising and attributing value to it according to our particular frame of reference. And this frame of reference is something we're constructing as well, because we see that other people are construing or interpreting or constructing the world in very different ways. How do they do that? How could they take that to be important? Actually, the question is, how do they take that to be important, and how do I take this to be important? That these are both gestures of organization and interpretation. And where do these gestures come from? They come from the ground. So in Dzogchen, the ground is the most important thing. It's the primordial basis of everything. And if we're not aware of the ground, we just have stuff. So this stupidity or opaque quality or dullness is the stuffness of the world. I'm here, I'm inside me, that's our feeling, isn't it? I'm inside me, looking out through my senses, liking this, not liking that. I am the starting point of myself. We remember that we have parents. Today, of course, is Mother's Day. So, thank you, Mum. And so we have roots and we have origins, but actually, moment by moment, I'm just me. The feeling tone of being an individual self is to be somehow self-existing. I know I breathe in and out, and if I stop breathing, I'll die, but basically, I'm just me. Does that seem a familiar feeling? So that's really what stupidity feels like. Now, of course, when Tick the box. Because it's a foreclosure. It's an encapsulation. Because I feel like me, and that feeling seems to be self-validating, it doesn't require any further investigation. It seems to be a done deal. It's just a given. Here I am. So why would I investigate it? So the meditation is the space of the opportunity to put into question, not in an intellectual way, but in a kind of revealing way, what is there. It's a way that lets us see the unfolding of the flow of mental experience, and to see whether there's any definite continuous self involved in that, or whether it's just streams of appearances arising and passing. But as long as we're in this cut-off, encapsulated individuality, I'm here in my body, and the one thing I definitely know is I'm not you. Whoever you are, you're not me. So self and other become an absolute separation or differentiation. Then looking at you, which could be people or houses or things in a shop, looking at these objects, we have two possibilities. Well, we have three possibilities. I like, I don't like, or I'm indifferent. So if you remember the 5 skandhas, the 5 basic organizing aspects of life in the general Buddhist tradition, the second one is feeling tone, positive, negative, neutral. A lot of what's here is instantly discounted. Nothing to do with me. So towards a lot of what's appearing in the world, there is a kind of numbness. Now, what is numb for me may be quite vital and alive for you. So I'm not at all interested in cars. So I don't look at cars except trying to avoid them hitting me. But people who like cars are checking out what's a new model of this and what kind of wheels they've got and this and that, because their attention is entrained to attributing value to that particular formation. So we all have that sort of selective attention. So the neutral is not very problematic, because if something is neutral to you, you don't develop an intention towards it. So if you don't develop an intention towards it, you don't mobilize towards it, and so there is no karmic consequence. And we looked at karma previously. But these other two, liking and not liking, lead into the next two of these poisons or afflictions, kleshas. And they are desire and aversion. Or it could be love, it could be longing, it could be yearning, it could be aversion, hatred, anger, disgust. It's wanting to push something away because the presence of this object is dangerous to me or contaminating to me or something unpleasant. And the other is, this object has value for me, I want to incorporate it in my world, I want to have access to it. So that's the great movement in the world that brings us into the endless busyness of our mind, a selective attention. I want more of this and I want less of that. And the kind of object that will take our attention will vary as we go through the various stages of our lives. When children are very small, they're drawn to particular kinds of toys, and then they become interested in other kinds of toys, and the first toys that were once the center of their world are no longer so central. And it moves on and on and on all through our lives. The kind of objects which hold our attention arise. Now, going back to stupidity or this mental dullness, it's marked by the sense of lack. The ego is an orphan, an alien. It's lost its home. Its home is the open ground of being. And it's a fraud. It's riding on false papers. So, I am James. That's a forged passport. That's a name. What does James refer to? Well, the content of James is changing according to circumstances. So, although I would go through time, through days and months and years, responding to the name James, James seems to be referring to me, but I am a fluctuating content. And so you never quite know what James is going to be. Well, I certainly don't know what I'm going to be. We are unreliable. The most reliable thing about me is my name. Isn't that amazing? Because our feelings change, our sensations change, our intentions change. We're affected by the weather, we're affected by who we're talking to, and so on. We're ceaselessly in interactive flux. That is to say, I am co-emergent. I'm interdependent with the field of experience. That's the phenomena of my existence. But I am James. I'm still me. So there's quite a tricky double move here in which I'm cheating myself by imagining that there is a substantial, essential continuity to myself underpinning what is going on, when in fact it's added onto the top. It comes after the fact of this endless change. And the endless change is not a problem, because when we open to the ground is truly stable. The open, ungraspable emptiness is not something other, it is the ground of our being. And when we rest in that openness, that indestructible Vajra openness, everything can be integrated, everything has its place. But when you identify with an ego that has a particular shaping, it's always insecure because it's not at home in itself. And that not at homeness I need to complete myself. And I seek to complete myself by getting more of what I want and avoiding the things that would undermine my sense of self. So the ongoing editing of our interaction with the field of experiences is a way of maintaining our kind of best shot at the continuity of our ego self in a recognizable form. Does that make sense? So if something happens in our life, an accident or a diagnosis, we get a bit knocked off course. Because how can I incorporate the fact that I now have this disease or this condition into my sense of self? I'm now required to be more conscious of my condition, and that could affect our diet, it could affect how we need to sit, what sort of chairs we need, or what sort of supports we need. Because illnesses and the general collapse of the body lets us see that actually the body has always been dependent on the environment. Now, if I don't have my reading glasses, increasingly I just can't read what's in front of me. Me and the glasses means reading. Me without the glasses means sitting there with kind of a bit of an eye strained. I can't get through to what's there. Before I didn't need glasses and I just thought I can read. Me and a book and I'm reading. But of course it wasn't that. It's me, book, reading on the basis of breathing. If I wasn't taking the air from the world into my lungs, I would not be reading, even when my eyes were in tip-top condition. So I'm always in dependence. I need the air. I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to drink, I need to shit, I need to piss, I need to get exercise, I need human companionship. I need a lot of things to keep this show on the road, but I'm just me. So the just me-ness of me is a way of ignoring my actual interdependence with the environment. And the more we see our interdependence, then of course we have to have gratitude for other people. Because I'm sitting here looking at you guys, and you are my world. You're not some sort of optional extra. Because of you being here, I become me in this particular mode. My talking with you is dependent on you being here. So I am called into being in a particular way by you. And as we know, some people lead very isolated lives, not of their choosing, and gradually they find it more and more difficult to hold things together. We use solitary confinement as a deep punishment in prisons. Because if you have no stimulus, how can you hold yourself together? That's a very strong underpinning of the fact that individuality, autonomy, is a red herring, it's a delusion, it's a lure. We're actually in need of interaction with others because we are interactive. Why? Because we are energy in a field of energy. We're not some kind of monad, some kind of singularity. We are multiple because we have many aspects to our personality, many potentials, and these become evoked through the diversity of the interactions that we have with other people. So, desiring some things and hating other things arises from trying to keep this show on the road. So, we hear that somehow some aspect of the Russian Secret Service is abroad in Britain involved in poisoning. So I had a quick look at the television this morning at the news, and they were going through the different newspapers, and some of the newspapers are saying we've got to kick all these wealthy oligarch Russians out of the country because we want to have real independence. We don't want people, foreigners, interfering with our British way of life. But the fact is, we need their money, so we want to hang on to them. So we don't like what they do, but we like their money. Oh, I think that applies to the Saudis as well. I think that applies to a hell of a lot of people that we sell our guns and bombs to, that we are divided. We're not really ethical. Because ethics would require one to think in a very clear way about the shaping of the situation and have one simple conclusion. You would speak truthfully with one voice, the voice of your heart. But we're not like that. We're duplicitous. We are doubled. We want the good things and we want to avoid the bad things. We don't want to become poor, so we have strange bedfellows. We're into surviving, which means scamming, double dealing, and cover-ups. And that's not just on the national level, it's on an individual level. We are all probably somewhat hypocritical because we've got to accommodate, we've got to make these moves. So that's how desire and aversion are moving. These are pulsatory. Desire and aversion is like a little two-stroke engine. Pum, 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 pum. Like, not like, not like. So we're interacting in this dynamic way with the world. And then, as the other main poisons, we have pride and jealousy. So pride is when we consolidate our sense of self and we think that we are something. Now, the old saying is pride takes a fall. And we see the dangers of hubris, the dangers of a kind of blind inflation in oneself, because what goes up must come down. Whatever is successful will not be successful. And So pride is an avoidance of the nature of causality and time. Everything is changing. Today's hero is unlikely to be tomorrow's hero. Every year, hundreds of thousands of books are published, and within 50 years, very few of them will still be available. Things move on. Lots of bands are playing in pubs and so on, but very few are going to make the big time. So people get very excited. Oh, we got our first gig. We're going to, and then it doesn't really go anywhere. But you have to believe in yourself. So pride is very tempting because it's a further sense of, I'm okay. And it can take quite a defensive turn. Jealousy is linked with envy. Envy tends to be a two-way or a two-person game, in the sense of I'm envious of how you are, I'm envious of your skill in learning languages or whatever it would be. Jealousy tends to be more triangular. I have something, but what I have is in danger. So now we have the story in the paper of Colin Firth and his charming wife, and she's had an affair with some guy in Italy. That's painful. You and I have decided to be together, but you want to be with him as well. It means I'm not enough. So you, as the one who is completing me, are now turning your attention away from me, and therefore the stability of my sense of identity is being undermined, and I'm going to feel quite jealous. I want you back focusing all your attention on me. This person's an intruder, but they might not just be an intruder. I may be the extruded, because they may go into a new circle that puts me out. So jealousy is the feeling tone of the fragility of the fact that our identity is compounded. It's created due to causes and conditions, and it's not self-existing. So the big delusion for the ego is complacency, is to fall asleep on the job and to think, I've arrived. This is great, this is fine, this is sorted. But life goes on, and there's new dynamics in relationships at every age. People in their 80s get divorced. You think, for God's sake, you've been together 50 years. What do you think would be better? Anything would be better. It's difficult. Life is not the way we want. So we go right back to the 3 marks of conditioned existence: suffering, impermanence, and the absence of inherent self-nature. The suffering arises from the delusion that we could stabilize the ever-moving surface of appearance. We're not in charge of the sensations in our body. We're not in charge of our physical health. We're not in charge of what thoughts arise or what feelings arise. Of course, you can, if you're preparing for an exam, you can try to orchestrate your focused attention to read the book and memorize the details that you'll have to regurgitate. But that lasts a very short period of time. Probably 2 months later, you won't remember very little of what you were learning in that way. Mostly, thoughts are coming to us, feelings are coming to us. So these are the basic 5 poisons, and they're called poisons because they are against health. We're not healthy when we are caught up in these. Health is the state of integration, and integration is when manifestation or appearance or aliveness or clarity or vitality is inseparable from its own ground, which is emptiness, where the reflection and the mirror are recognized together. We become sick when we imagine that the reflection in the mirror has some kind of truth in itself, that we can create a representation which is continuous, or we can even use the representation as a double move, so that the representation becomes a kind of story which is not really me. And it doesn't really matter what story I have, because I have a separate existence. Like in the story with Oscar Wilde, where this man develops the understanding that the painting of Dorian Gray, the painting can contain the change. The representation can hold all the changing and the aging, while he himself steps out of that. Now, many of us may have that experience ourselves. We feel just me. And then we look in the painting, which for us is the mirror. In the morning, you look in the mirror and you think, who is that? That is me, but it doesn't feel like me. How come I look old when spring's in the air and I feel quite fresh? So the image is not who I really am. That's, I think, a common feeling as we get older. We can't recognize how we have turned out looking like this because we just feel the same. So there is a displacement between the presentation or the representation and the feeling tone. And we can't quite catch up with the fact that we are getting older. And therefore, the feeling of, I'm just me, is a delusion which can lead people into having accidents and making mistakes because they feel they still have the same physical strength that they had 20, 30 years ago, which is not the case. So, these tendencies are 5 poisons, and they ripple out. You get, in the text, you can get many different descriptions of patterns of how we become confused and mislead ourselves. But if we stay with these 5, when they're mixed in with our thinking, they seem to offer an intensification of clarity, because this is my friend and I like them or I love them and I wish them well. This is my enemy and I don't like them and I wish them harm. And that's a lot of what is going on. It's very clear that Britain's enemies are gathering around like vultures to eat us up after Brexit. The enemy tendencies were held at bay for many years because of the EU. The EU operates as a kind of referee that stops some of the more vicious fighting. But when the referee is no longer able to operate, we will really see we have a lot of enemies, a lot of historical things. Why? Because it's very easy to say, we don't like you. It's cheap and cheerful. Complex negotiations, I don't like you. Much easier to hate people. It solves problems, because if I hate you, I know that you're an arsehole, and that's all you are. Put you in a box. I hate you. I love you, you're so special. Put you in a box. Put you in a box. Get a new relationship. Oh, perfect. Introduce them to your friends. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. You don't understand what it's like being with them, because your friends see something you don't want to see, because you put them in a box. And that's why love and hate are so dangerous, because they're both modalities of blindness. So that's why these 5 poisons are dangerous. We think we have optimal clarity looking through a very opaque lens. And then the 8th consciousness is the alaya vijnana, or the ground consciousness. Now this ground is not the infinite open ground of emptiness. It's more like the ground of the ocean, which is covered in silt. It's a level of accretion of deposits. And it, of course, when you look at the bottom of the ocean, take a camera and you go down, you see the silt and it's what's there. And it looks like the ground, it is the ground, but if you stand on it, and clouds of fine dust rise up. So there are different ways in which this is understood in different Buddhist traditions, but usually it's seen as an accumulated or a compounded situation in which there is a gradual build-up of trace elements of every experience that has ever occurred. And sometimes it's seen as a storehouse consciousness, a kind of universal bank vault where everything is some trace, or an archive where everything is held. Its actual nature, as the actual nature of everything, is emptiness, but it functions as a kind of holder. And so in some ways it's got some resemblance to some of Jung's ideas about archetypes and kind of open psyche, a psyche which is not the individual mind, but is an informative force which might manifest in dreams and symbols and so on. So some of the time, I would imagine we've had the experience that in our life something arises in our mind and we can't imagine where it came from. It's just some kind of weird thing that comes in our mind. And that's because what I call my mind is not separated from everything else. Because I am an interactive creature through my body, through my speech, and through my mind, I have access to these resources. And the less I am caught up in my ego focus, the foreclosure of my own preoccupations, the more these other streams of information can arise for me. So for a lot of people, that main pathway is in dreams. You have really weird dreams. You think, what was that all about? Because in the dream, the ego is not in its defensive structure. And people who do a lot of meditation can develop a much more intuitive understanding. And what is intuition but a non-ego related way of knowing? You just know, and you don't know why you know, but it seems to ring true. Something comes to you. And of course everything comes to us because we're not a little factory inside ourselves. We are more like a distribution point. You can see that, certainly when I travel on the train, outside of the towns, there's some huge big warehouse and it's got all these numbered doorways, 1 to 20 or 40, and these huge big trucks are outside. And that's a distribution point. Stuff is fed in there and then allocated and packed into the lorries for further distribution. And that's what we're like. Stuff feeds into us, gets moved around a wee bit, and then we package it out in different ways to different people. But we're not actually producing anything. We're communicating what comes in and what goes out. So clearly, with these 8 consciousnesses, our felt sense that we are clear about what's going on is not necessarily very accurate. And so when we go to die, it's very easy to be in states of emotion, to have regrets at things that we've done, to be upset that other people will continue living and we won't live. You can read, unfortunately, on a fairly regular level of, and it's unfortunately again men who do this, men who kill their wife and then kill their kids. It was in the paper just the last week. A man stabs his wife to death, takes the kids in the car to the south coast, takes the kids and jumps off the cliff. If I can't have you, no one else will. Just imagining what that would be like to be in that state. To be so obsessed, so cathected, so merged into this emotional turmoil and this belief, this hatred and this desire and this jealousy, and it's all just fuck you. And the kids have got to die as well. This is not at all uncommon. If I'm going to die, everything's got to die. Everything's got to vanish. So, killing arises very easily in this world. Killing, ting, ting, ting. Killing arises because the object is denied subjectivity. And in fact, if I manage to kill someone, I make them a permanent object. When you die and you become a corpse, in our culture, we don't want to keep our corpses at home. We could have them desiccated and then have just a kind of dried out mummy. Some cultures do that, keep them wrapped in plastic and relate to that, but we tend not to do that because the living person, the subject, has vanished and we're left with an object. And we don't want the object. Because what would you do with an object? And that's the same if you kill someone, you turn their subjectivity into something vanished and you're just left with an object. You cut off their life force. Why would you do that? Because if you're alive, you might hurt me. You might be more successful than me, so I would feel envious. You might do all sorts of things. But if you're dead, no trouble, no disturbance. The death of my enemies is my safety. We know that has happened with genocides. I can only be free if you're not there, because your very presence is disturbing to me. So there you see the perversity of dependent the perversity of the misreading of dependent co-origination. The fact that we are interactive beings and that this is our very nature, and it's a terrible thing not to be disturbed by other people. If nobody makes use of you, you are useless. Now we might think, well, I don't want people to use me, but actually if nobody uses you, if you have no use, it's pretty bleak. It's nice to be useful. I remember when I used to see my mum when she was very old, and she'd say, oh, right, Jimmy, I want to give you a wee bit of money. And she'd go in her purse and there'd be nothing there, because she would always just give the money away to people. And they said, I don't even have any money. How come I don't have any money? Oh, well, Mum, you know. But I'm your mother. I'm your mother. It's like that. It's like, I can't do that for you. And then she would get very sad. Oh, Sophie, Mum, you did all this and we used to do that. And tell her a story and she'd come a wee bit more back into herself. But it's something quite bleak, isn't it? I can't do anything. Everybody does everything for me. It can be quite a humiliating kind of feeling. So being useful, being of use, is enormously important. And being of use means to be connected with other people. And it also means to have the plasticity that I can formulate myself into the shape that will give me an optimal connection with you, so that I'm useful to you. Because if I just was a stookie and kept my own fixed shape, then it wouldn't be very helpful to other people. So it is my flexibility, my plasticity, my adaptability that is the basis of love or compassion or connectivity or caring or helping. It's the fact that I am not fixed that makes me useful. And that's an amazing thing. So the 5 poisons operate as a restriction on that, because they are the voice of the anxious ego that wants to maintain a fixed shape. But I'm just me. So if I can dominate and control the situation, then you won't make me do things, and I'll be the master, I'll be the boss. But it's quite bleak at the top. If you've ever been a manager in an organization, it's very lonely. Everyone else is having a wee blether and you walk into the room. I'm just me. Oh no, you're not. So power can, by excluding you from a certain communality, is often a burden to be borne. So the more we try to be the one who makes things have the shape that we think they should be, we're de facto attacking the freedom of people to make their own shapes. This is the new decision, the new pro forma that's come through from the head office, and this is how we're going to operate from now on. Really? A little bit of sabotage goes on, some resistance in the system, because we want to have responsiveness. We want to be able to have a mind of our own, a body of our own, emotions of our own, whereby we can relate. So the 5 poisons become a limiting factor to the possibility of trusting the free flow of interaction. That people, if given freedom and not too much direction, but with their freedom, the encouragement to pay attention to other people, something good will come of that. It's the basis of group therapy. In group therapy, you sit in a group, first you're just strangers, and gradually you find a way of having a conversation. You find a way of relating to people who are not like you, who say things that you don't particularly appreciate or like. But after some time, if you hang in there and you give attention to them, you start to, at first you're giving attention to what they're saying as it impacts you. Then you start to give attention to them as the speaker, and then somehow you give attention to them. And what they're saying doesn't matter so much, because you've now got the feeling tone of a person. And then the group really starts to function and become supportive. Some of you may have experienced that. But that means not entering into judgment about the other person, not having a premature conclusion about who they are and whether you like them or you don't like them, but it's giving them space. Now, to give someone space means I have to find space in myself. So if I'm more relaxed and spacious, in that space, they have more space to be themselves, and then we all loosen up. So in terms of death, the flexibility and the malleability that arises from connectivity, compassion, caring, involvement is actually a very useful way of entering into the domain of wisdom, which would be letting go of everything at the point of death and opening into the ground spaciousness. So in that way, compassion feeds into wisdom, and wisdom supports compassion. Are there any thoughts about that? Any things you want to raise, or your own experiences? Yeah.
So you've been describing the different consciousnesses, the structure of our being that we're living through, and how that hides our ground nature. The practice is a sort of poking holes through to that structure. Is it to make that, because we do have to live through these consciousness, is it a sort of trying just to relax that to get the space coming through? Is that an accurate sort of metaphor, or is there the intention coming from the ground itself?
Well, everything has the same ground. So everything is the display of the ground, and you can track anything through to the ground. So it's not that you have to change your behavior. Of course, in the general Buddhist teachings, the Mahayana Buddhist teachings, it gives a lots of encouragement to develop love and compassion and goodwill. But in a sense, it's a bit like moving the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic. This body's going to sink. This body's heading to oblivion. And so, what is this boat? So, say you're very selfish. You can sit in the meditation, and because you're generally selfish, some selfishness arises. So you stay with the selfishness, not merging into it, not stepping back from it and trying to avoid it, but you just... Now you see what is selfishness. Selfishness is a potential pattern of energy. That's all it is. And I become selfish when I merge into selfishness. Or if you if your tendency is to be angry, angry thoughts arise, you stay present with that. And this with is quite a difficult concept. In Tibetan it says toktu, which means kind of on top. But the image again would be the mirror and the reflection. To really be present, we have to be like the mirror. So a thought is arising. We think a reflection arises in the mirror. The reflection is not the mirror, because you turn the mirror around and that reflection goes and another one arises. The reflection is in the mirror. The angry thought is in me, intimately, but I'm not the angry thought. So I don't have to get rid of it because it's not me, but I have to not fuse with it. So it's really this balanced fulcrum point. I'm not tilted away from it. I'm not tilted to merging into it. I'm just with it. Anger is arising. Then maybe jealousy is arising. Then maybe boredom's arising. All kind of things can arise. Now, if I have a distaste, if after the feeling of jealousy, there's a distasteful feeling, I don't want to be like this, what has happened? A thought is now entering into judgment on another thought. And if I keep doing that, then I have an endless ricocheting between self as subject and self as object. Because the jealous thought arises, me, I'm not like that. I don't want to be like that. So now what was me, the jealous thought, is now object, and I'm now the judging subject. I'm not going to be like that anymore. And then there's another thought that says, oh, but we were looking at how judging's not very helpful. So now Dharma thought as subject is looking at judging thought as object. And you get this kind of like Russian dolls endlessly, more commentary and more commentary and more commentary. And there's no end to that commentary. So if you take up a position and you try to correct or try to improve your mind, it's just more production of busyness, which on an ethical, dualistic in the world with other people is not a bad thing to do. It's not about being self-indulgent. But in the meditation, we want to be with what is occurring, letting it occur without identifying. And that is very tricky. It's balance. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. When you learn to ride a bicycle, you tend to go to one side or the other. And you're often trying too hard because you haven't felt through your body and through the bicycle what balance is. Now, before you got onto a bicycle, you were a wee toddler. To toddle is to kind of waddle, isn't it? When you see little ones and they're just starting to stand up, they're pretty unstable, and then they run a bit and then they fall down because they haven't kind of worked out what is balance. They have an enthusiasm which leads to a self-forgetfulness, so they fall over. So learning to ride a bicycle, you have to feel the bicycle. You have to incorporate the bicycle as part of yourself and not dominate it. Otherwise you do too much. Does that make sense? So it's the same way. This balance point of being with what is arising is very subtle. And the more I try to do it and to make it, I'm taking up a position. I am now the controller of the content of my mind, and so I lose the point of balance. So that's why we say it's about releasing and relaxing. Releasing the busy arousal that it's all up to me and I have to do it. And relax so that we let it happen, but we're present with the happening. So that's quite an unusual way of going. So of course again and again we merge into it and we get distracted and go off on a riff, or we come back, and then if we start to go into a judgment, we then think about what has just happened, which of course doesn't help. So the instruction is always be very tender with yourself, very gentle and kind. Just as you would with a small kid, you say, oh, accident, these things happen, never mind sweetie, I'll wipe it up. And life goes on. But if you get into blaming the child because they've done something that they couldn't really help, all you get is retraction in the child and distrust. So it's the same for us. We have to not be on our own case, because if you're on your own case, a good part of you is located as the judge. And the judge is separate. It's very important in countries to have uncorruptible judges. There's a big theme in Italy, bribing judges. The mafia getting in there and slipping in the envelope. So if you have an incorruptible judge, it's a wonderful thing. But that means the judge stands alone. The judge seems to speak the truth. And that's what the ego judge position is like. But it's a lie. The judging will always be in the domain of duality. These apples are not good. Well, that's a useful thing to know in the world. I don't want to buy these apples. Look at them. Why are you trying to sell me this stuff? It's rubbish. Come on, give me a proper apple. No, if you don't want to get cheated, you have to have some discernment. But I see the apple is not good. Subject is here, apple over there is the object, and I'm putting a judgment onto it. In Buddhism, these are called the three wheels, and the movement of these three wheels together is what keeps the movement of samsara going. Subject, object, and the connection between them. So if you rely on internal judgment as your corrector, you are maintaining a dualistic stance. Now, many people, especially older people, were brought up where there was still quite a lot of parental opinion or super ego structure in society. Kids got told off a lot. They were being corrected all the time and taught to do things the proper way, according to the family structure. That's softened in the culture. But when you have a strong judge, you can always evaluate, am I doing it right or wrong, good or bad? Right, wrong, duality, polarity. Letting go of that is difficult. So the primordial Buddha in Dzogchen is Kuntu Zangpo. Kuntu means always, Zangpo means good. Always good. Everything is good under all circumstances. So being clear is good, being unclear is good. But we want to be clear. The way to be clear is not to try to be clear. Because if you separate clear and unclear, you have relative clarity, which is always in danger of darkness taking it over. Yeah? Because it's arising due to causes and conditions. But non-dual clarity arises when you see whether I'm generous or selfish, whether I'm cruel or kind. Cruelty is empty. Kindness is empty. This is not a prescription for behavior in the world. It's an encouragement in meditation not to enter into judgment, but to be present with the mind as it is, so that the empty nature of the manifesting forms can become clear. So that you see, for example, today it's a little bit cloudy, but maybe some big dark clouds arise. You think, oh God, it's going to rain again. So we say the light fluffy cloud is good and the dark cloud is bad. Both are clouds. They have no substance to them. If you get in an airplane, you can just go up through the cloud. There's no resistance, there's nothing there. It's just little droplets of water hanging in suspension. So in the same way, when you see a cruel thought is empty, it is a potential which will be activated if you enter into it. And that would be reinforcing it, so we'd think, oh, I don't want to do that. But if I think this is a cruel thought, this is a bad thought, I have to avoid it, you're also reinforcing it. Does that make sense? Because rejection is also pushing something. So if I push the wall behind me, as we learned when we were at school, the wall has to operate an equal and opposite force. Otherwise I push the wall over. So if I push towards the bottle of water on the table, the bottle will fall over because it doesn't have the capacity to operate an equal and opposite force, but the wall does. Yeah? That is to say, I'm rejecting the bottle of water, and I'm putting my energy into it such that it falls over. I'm reinforcing the energetic field of the object. Does that make sense? Because this is very important. So we do nothing, but we are present. Presence is not an activity, it is an availability. We're here. So the outer preparation for that is to generally be mindful of walking, of talking, of how you drink a cup of tea and so on. But it's ordinary mindfulness is still quite dualistic. I am mindful of what is going on. But the more subtle form of that is to recollect, just to be present. Here I am. Not as I am, but just here, just present. So that's why we sit, just open. And of course, a lot of the time we identify with things. If you identify with your body, then there's a kind of background sense, I'm sitting here trying to meditate. That's a construct. That's something you are telling yourself. You're explaining to yourself what is going on. I, as subject, am telling myself a story. Subject tells a story to object. Then the story ends. Then you're just here. And then another story catches you. And then the story vanishes. And the more you can see how you're caught up in the story, the easier it is not to get caught up in the story. And then you stay more balanced and grounded. All sorts of things are coming and going. And it is what it is. So a noise goes, a thought could arise, oh, that's a mobile phone. Why don't they turn their phone off? Blah, 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 blah. Whole riff of thoughts. Oh, it's just a noise. What is it? It's a noise. It is a noise, that's all. It's just a noise. The rest is our interpretation and mental elaboration. So this is the heart of the Dzogchen meditation. Less is more. If the ego does less and less and less to the point that it does nothing, then it becomes inseparable from the ground awareness, and so Rigpa shines forth, awareness shines forth like the sun in the sky. But the more ego is in its selectivity accepting this, rejecting that, trying to formulate the world according to its own interests, dispositions, habit formations, then the ground is covered. It's opaque. And what's it covered with? Our own projections, our own beliefs. I'm like this, I like this, I don't like that. Is that clear? So, luckily, we have this recorded both in video and audio recording, and you might, if it takes your fancy, you could listen to this again and again. Just listen to a bit, stop, examine your own life, do a bit of practice and think, is this true? Is what James is saying, does it illuminate how it actually is for me? And if you're interested, you can look in the book Simply Being, and it has 3 chapters on meditation and meditation problems. And the meditation problems are always in the format of, I can't get beyond this limit in my meditation. I become angry or I become jealous. And the instruction from great yogis like Patu Rinpoche is always, don't enter into what is arising. The problem is your identification with the emergent form. Relax and stay present, and the emergent form will manifest its own empty nature. So you don't have to purify the mind, because everything has been pure from the very beginning. What you have to stop doing is spraying pig shit over everything. Okay, let's have a break. Let's have a short break, because we don't have so much time. If we have a break for 20 minutes, please.